Hello, and welcome back to my channel, Talented Reads. Today's video is my April wrap-up for the Horror Challenge. So from our current graphic, and again, I'd like to reiterate, I did not create this. I found this on the internet and decided to create a challenge for myself. But April is our first dip into the killer category with slashers. I was so excited to get to this category. This is one of my favorite horror genres. I did complete the prior two sections, the monster and paranormal. Lots of good content for that. We've got some pretty heavy categories this last half of the year, so yeah, lots of good stuff coming up. But let's talk about slashers for a second. So I would venture to say that when most people think of the horror genre, a slasher is probably what comes to mind. I found an article online by Industrial Scripts, which is a screenwriting company, and they put out a list of basically what makes a slasher, or rather what they think are the key elements of a slasher movie. So there are 13 of them. So I thought it would be fun to go through them. So let's go through all 13 elements. So 1, you have to have a psychotic killer, which seems obvious. 2, the killer's backstory is revealed, which is basically this is how or why the killer becomes a killer. I have mixed feelings on this because a lot of times this ends up being a long, drawn-out, villainous speech, which, depending on how they do it, I'm not always a fan of. But 3 is setting and location. To me, this is a big one. I think the setting should be creepy, isolated, or just maybe unsettling. 4 is set a time. The killing spree often takes place over one day or night. Now, some of these slashers have killed before and return for a one night kind of deal. 5, weapon of choice. Again, this seems kind of obvious. Slasher movies, I almost think, have weapons that become just as popular as the villain himself. 6, multiple victims. Says there needs to be multiple victims to have an escalating level of threats. It's the way of getting to the final girl. 7, characters split up. When there's a group, it must be split up. The group separates, making them easy targets for the killer. Furthermore, the characters will be killed off one by one rather than together, which allows each character to get their own unique death. 8 is stranded signals. Communication is often disabled or non-existent in slashers. 9, jump scares. Though cliche, it is effective in raising the audience heart rate, which, is really the point, 10, illogical thinking. Characters don't think logically when they're in a state of turmoil and shock. I'm glad this is an element because there's oftentimes I watch it and I'm like, dude, what are you doing? Number 11, the killer resurrects. The characters believe they have killed the villain once and for all until he or she is resurrected for one last scare. 12 is the final girl. The sole survivor and often the character that goes head to head in a fight against our villain. And lastly, number 13 is a killer ending. Most great and memorable slashers leave the ending on a cliffhanger. So I think this is a great list, and honestly, most of the slashers that come to my mind fit almost all of these elements. But I thought for fun, in addition to my book rating, I thought we could have a slasher rating as well. So I'll rate the books that I read on a 5 slasher scale in relation to like how well it fit into our 13 elements. Alrighty, let's dive into it. So I read a total of 4 books. First is Brother by Anya Alborn. The Morrows keep to themselves, and it served them well so far. When girls go missing off the side of the highway, the cops don't knock on their door, which is a good thing, seeing as to what's buried in the Morrows' backyard. But 19-year-old Michael isn't like the rest of his family. When he meets Alice, a pretty girl working at a record shop in the small nearby town, he's immediately smitten. For a moment, he nearly forgets about the monster he's become. But his brother, Rebel, is all too eager to remind him of his place. Okay, so this wasn't bad, but I don't think it's my favorite Anya book. It's pretty gory. It's pretty dark. It's pretty fucked up. There's, mentions of family bond, generational trauma. There's a pretty good twist. Everything played out. Obviously one major thing, I kind of figured out early on. It wasn't all that surprising. However, now, I did get this recommended in a Reddit post for a slasher, and I would say, as far as the slasher scale, this one was rough because while I get why somebody would recommend it as a slasher, I think I would categorize it elsewhere in the horror universe. So on our slasher scale, I'm going to say a 2. This is much more of like a family of killers rather than like one masked villain. And there's like none of the characters split up. There's no stranded signals. They're like in town. They pick up their people and bring them back to the ranch. I guess we kind of do get a backstory. But there's no like classic final girl. There's no, I don't know. I guess it does have a pretty killer ending. But yeah. Next is Tastes Like Candy by Ivy Tholen. Everyone at Pritchett High wants an invitation to the senior scavenge. Violet Warren and her friends are the lucky ones. 8 girls will break into the Poison Apple Carnival after hours for a scavenger hunt. Then at sunrise, they'll gather for a celebration in honor of their upcoming senior year. But someone has another game planned. This was great. This was my first Ivy book, and after I read this, I immediately bought her other 2 books, which I think are slashers. I think she only writes slashers or something. It's obviously teenager, but I wouldn't categorize it as a young adult book. There's pretty gory death scenes, and I loved the backdrop of the carnival. And so, of course, for our slasher scale, this is a solid 5. It literally hit all the elements. It was made to be a slasher, and Ivy nailed it. Next is Clown in a Cornfield 2 by Adam Cesar. We follow Quinn from the first book, which was set after the Kettle Springs massacre. Quinn finds that her past won't leave her alone when she becomes the focus of online conspiracy theories that claim the Kettle Springs massacre never happened. It's a deranged but relentless fantasy, and there's nothing Quinn can do to get people to hear the truth. So when a murderous clown attacks Quinn at a frat party, Quinn realizes that the facts alone are never going to save her. Her only option is to go back into the cornfields, back where the nightmare began, to set the record straight the only way she knows how. So this is the second one, but I really enjoyed the first one as well. They're just great. It's just good old fun, you know? I wasn't sure where Adam was going to go after the first book, but he certainly made the second one just as great as the first one. And he dropped a hint on social media that I think there's going to be a third one, which is exciting. You know, there's a really good mix of characters, and good lord, have they been through it. Again, you know, Dory's death scenes, which we all love. Now, on the slasher scale, I would give this a 4. And the reason I knocked it down is it's a little different than a typical slasher. Like, as far as the numbers of killers, you know, there's multiple killers, multiple victims. It was definitely not set on one night. I think it's like a buildup of events to the one final showdown, but still set a little bit different. I mean, and of course, the setting and a cornfield, like, come on, that's just genius, right? And a clown as the killer, again, amazing. Next is Security by Gina Woolsdorf. When the gleaming new Manderley Resort opens in 24 hours, Santa Barbara's exclusive beachfront hotel will offer its patrons the ultimate in luxury and high-tech security. No indulgence has been ignored, no detail overlooked, but all the money in the world can't guarantee safety. As hotel manager Tessa and her employees ready the hotel for its invitation-only grand opening, a killer is in their midst. One by one, staff are picked off with ruthful precision. So I rated this book 3 stars, and I would give this a 3 on the slasher scale as well. Though I think this follows maybe the more important or maybe well-known slasher elements. Where it differs is like the illogical thinking, because no one at the hotel really knows there's a killer on the loose, so they have no time to make a different decision. Like, these are workers just going about their day. So, I mean, there's really none of that almost tension. Like, you know the killer's watching them and is like right behind their shoulder, but they have no freaking clue, right? So as such, you know, I think it does take the tension down a little bit, and of course makes it a little different than your traditional slasher. But we do get lots of killings, which I guess is the point, right? So that's it for the books that I read. Let's chat through my book recommendations, and then we'll get into the movies. First is My Heart is a Chainsaw by Stephen Graham Jones. Jade Daniels is an angry, half-Indian outcast with an abusive father, an absent mother, and an entire town that wants nothing to do with her. She lives in her own world, a world in which protection comes from an unusual source: horror movies. especially the ones where a mass killer seeks revenge on a world that has wronged them. And Jade narrates the quirky history as if it is one of those movies. But when blood actually starts to spill in the waters of Indian Lake, she pulls us into her dizzying encyclopedic mind of blood and masked murderers and predicts exactly how the plot will unfold. This was great. One of my favorite Stephen Graham Jones books. This is the first, and I don't know if it's going to be a duology or if they're going to continue on. And I'm including it because I think it's a little bit different. It's definitely a homage to slashers. Like, Jade Daniels talks about all of the elements in a slasher movie, which of course pretty much line up with our 13 elements that we talked about. But it's more of like a sense where our main character tries to fit the elements into the narrative of what's happening in her town, which is kind of a cool way to go about it. And of course, she still did all that gory fun, right? Next is Daphne by Josh Malerman. It's the last summer for Kit Lamb, this last summer before college, the last summer with her high school basketball team, and with Dana, her best friend. The last summer before her life begins. But the night before the big game, one of the players tells a ghost story about Daphne, a girl who went to their school many years ago and died under mysterious circumstances. Some say she was murdered, others that she died by her own hand, and some say that Daphne is a murderer herself. They also say that Daphne is still out there, obsessed with revenge, and will appear to kill again anytime someone thinks about her. After Kit hears the story, her teammates vanish one by one. Now, this wasn't a favorite for me, but I'm including it as a recommendation because I do think it fits a lot of the slasher elements, and there's been a lot of people that have been enjoying this. I think I was probably a little too harsh on it. One, because I've read a lot of Josh Malerman, and I think I was kind of comparing this to his other stuff. Yeah. What I did like about this, though, is the killer resurrection element. You know, this idea that words are powerful enough to bring back a killer. Very unique. And, of course, Daphne as a killer was creepy as hell. Next, Final Girls by Riley Sager. In that instance, college student Quincy Carpenter became a member of a very exclusive club, a group of survivors the press dubbed the Final Girls. Lisa, who lost 9 sorority sisters to a college dropout's knife. Sam, who endured the sack man during her shift at the Nightlight Inn. And now Quincy, who ran bleeding through the woods to escape the massacre at Pine Cottage. Despite the media's attempts, 3 girls have never met. Now, Quincy is doing well, but her mind won't let her recall the events of that night. The past is in the past until the last final girl is found dead in her bathtub, and the second final girl appears on Quincy's doorstep. This is one that I remember staying up at night to read. You know, of course, I think Riley Sager is known for more of a thriller, but I would categorize this as horror. It has some horror elements to it. Lots of twists and turns, and this was my first introduction to Riley's books, so I love that. But again, what I liked most is that it was like right alongside with the character. You know, I knew what they knew. I was in it together. I felt like I was actually in the book, which I liked. Now, as far as slashery. This is, again, more of the resurrection kind. Think of, like, Michael Myers coming after Laurie, like, movie after movie. Yeah. Now, I'm going to cheat a little bit and put another book on here by the same author that I already talked about. But I'm also including The Last Final Girl by Stephen Graham Jones because it just makes sense. And as the synopsis says, life in a slasher film is easy. You just have to know when to die. So this was another just okay book for me, but great for this subgenre. It's short, but it's really interesting because it's a slasher film, like, format in the book. It read more like a movie script, which is kind of cool. So, and of course, it had all the elements with that. And I think this book is really about kind of fighting to become the last final girl. Like, our main character is a huge slasher movie fan, and so that was kind of like her goal in the movie, was to be the last final girl. So, yeah. All right, that's it for the books. Now the fun part, the movies. Now, for the movies, there are a lot of really classic, well-known slasher movies. Like, of course, Halloween. You know, you have the Scream franchise, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th, and all of the Jason movies. Chucky, what is the Chucky one called? Child's Play? I think that's what it is. And, you know, you could even include, like, I Know What You Did Last Summer, Scary Movie, even that's more of a comedy take on it. There's probably even one you're thinking of that I missed, but I wanted to try to find some lesser well-known movies to watch and recommend. So here we go. I watched 4 new movies. The first one was High Tension. Best friends Marie and I guess it's Alexa decide to spend a nice quiet weekend at Alexa's parents' secluded farmhouse. But on the night of their arrival, the girls' getaway turns into an endless night of horror. This is a French film, which I think in France it also goes by Haute Tension. This was interesting. I am a little surprised at the direction that it took. I would definitely recommend this as a slasher, but I think the ending and the killer part of it is not a typical slasher, which I think does the film some good because you obviously weren't expecting that. So yeah, wasn't too bad. Next is Pearl. In 1918, a young woman on the brink of madness pursues stardom in a desperate attempt to escape the drudgery, isolation, and loveliness of life on her parents' farm. So, again, this wasn't bad. You know, when it first opened up, I was like, did I mind watching the right movie? Is this a horror movie? Because it really makes it out to be like this really grand, beautiful thing. And then, of course, it gets dark from there. And again, I would consider this a slasher. But I think the focus of the people that are dying is far and few between. I don't know that, it's not like a killing spree in the middle of town. But yeah, I think, I don't remember the girl's name that plays is it Mia Goth? She did a freaking fantastic job playing Pearl. It was a little awkward at times, but you really get the sense of just like how crazy she is. Next is Hellfest. A masked serial killer turns a horror-themed amusement park into his own personal playground, terrorizing a group of friends while the rest of the patrons believe that it is all part of the show. Okay, if you're looking for a really good home down classic slasher movie, this is the one for you. I loved this movie. At first I was like, this is, I don't know, kind of cheesy. But once you get to the killing, I'm like, oh yeah, here we go. This is the slasher I like. Yeah, it was great. And lastly, I watched Happy Death Day. A college student must relive the day of her murder over and over again in a loop that will end only when she discovers her killer's identity. I liked this more than I thought I would. It was kind of one of those ones that like I'd heard of, but was never super interested in watching it. And then it got recommended to me as a good slasher, and I was like, oh, I didn't realize it was a slasher movie. So I watched it. I can see why it's a slasher movie. It has the elements, except for the multiple victims. Well, I guess if you count her as a multiple victim, because she dies literally over and over again. But again, very interesting concepts. I thought all the characters did very well. I liked kind of how it played out. Yeah, it was really good. I think there's a second one, which I don't know if I'm interested in watching the second one, because if it's anything like the first one, it just seems repetitive. But now for my recommendations. First, I have Candyman. The Candyman, a murderous soul with a hook for a hand, is accidentally summoned to reality by a skeptic grad student researching the monster's myth. Oh, I love Candyman. So I would say watch the original film, which I think was like in the 90s. And then do yourself a favor and watch the newer release. A lot of people were saying that was like a remake. And it's not really a remake. It's more like a sequel. It ties into the first one very well. But I would definitely recommend watching the first one first. And it is a good old slasher. I mean, a guy with a hook for a hand. I mean, come on. And the bees and it's great. Next, Willys Wonderland. A quiet drifter is tricked into a janitorial job at the now condemned Willys Wonderland. The mundane task suddenly becomes an all-out fight for survival against wave after wave of demonic animatronics. Yeah. This was quite a trip of a movie. At first I was like, what in the hell am I watching? But I gotta admit, I laughed. I thought it was fun. Nicolas Cage plays in it, and he literally doesn't say anything through the entire movie, which is kind of funny in itself. And yes, it really is about killer animatronics. I think the setting is there, the time is there, because it really is set over like one night of him staying at this Willys Wonderland place. It's kind of a mix-up of the final girl trope, and, you know, at first you're not really sure, like, who the villain is, so, yeah, it's great. If you're looking for more of, like, a lighthearted, funny take to the slasher, this is definitely a good one. Next is Fear Street. And I'm gonna include, like, the 3 movie series as one, because it does all kind of tie together. This is a circle of teenage friends accidentally encounter the ancient evil responsible for a series of brutal murders that have plagued their town for over 300 years. Welcome to Shadyside. So these are like a 3-part movie series. So you know, your first one's like modern day, and then the second one's set before that, and then the first one's set like way before that. These are great. They are very slashery, lots of gore. You know, you have your masked villain, you have all of the elements are there. You got the resurrection. I would say rather than the one masked villain though, there's a little twist to that, but it's definitely slasher-esque. And lastly is The Rental. This is 2 couples rent a vacation home for what should be a celebratory weekend getaway. This is probably a little risky of me putting this on here, because it's kind of slashery. I would say it's slashery. But it's definitely a different style. There's still the gore, there's still the killing, but of course it's a little more isolation than you typically see in a lot of slasher movies. But I think a lot of the elements are there with this movie. So I would still watch it if I were you, you know? Can't go wrong. Well, that is everything for today's video. Drop a comment below and let me know if you have any slasher favorites, books, and or movies. I would love to hear about them. This first category in the section was killer. Get it? And I can't wait for May. I think we're tackling crime horror, which is interesting. Yeah. So I'll see you in my next video. Bye.